Here is part 1, written in simple English, natural tone, and about 1,700 words. Placed as a separate document as you requested, the restaurant sat at the corner of a busy street, the kind of place where people came not because they were hungry, but because they wanted to feel important. The floor always smelled a little like fresh bread and coffee, and the lights were warm enough to make everything look a bit softer than it really was. Workers moved quietly from table to table, carrying trays and trying not to disturb the kind. Of customers who would complain if a fork was placed 1 inch to the wrong side. Among those workers was a young waitress who had been there longer than most people realized. She moved with quiet steps, the way someone walks when they don't want to draw attention. She kept her hair tied back, wore the same simple smile every day, and spoke only when she needed to. Customers rarely remembered her face. Some recognized her as the girl who brings water, or the one who never talks much, but almost no one asked her name. She didn't mind most days. Staying unnoticed meant fewer people asking questions she didn't always want to answer. She had learned to be grateful for the silence, even if sometimes it felt a little too heavy. Every morning, she arrived before the others. She cleaned the tables, checked the chairs, and made sure everything looked perfect. Then she would pause for a moment beside the grand piano near the center of the dining room. It was a beautiful instrument, dark wood, smooth surface, and keys so clean they looked untouched. Most customers thought it was just decoration. Some even asked if it was fake, but she knew it WASN every time she stood next to it. She felt something familiar inside her chest, like an old memory trying to wake up. She never opened the cover, never dared to sit down and play, even though her fingers sometimes twitched with the urge to touch the keys. She used to play every day when she was younger. She used to dream of becoming someone who told stories through music, someone who held the attention of a whole room with just a melody. But life had a way of pulling dreams away when reality needed attention. Bills, work, responsibilities, they all grew louder than the sound of a piano. So she walked past the instrument each day and reminded herself that dreams can wait, even if she didn't know for how long. The restaurant grew busy as the day went on. Customers filled the tables with their voices, their laughter, and their impatience. She touched dozens of plates, hundreds of cups, and answered the same questions again and again. Is this gluten-free? Can you bring more napkins? I asked for no ice. This has ice. She apologized, nodded, moved quickly. She had learned that the faster she fixed things, the fewer complaints she received. She didn't mind the routine. It kept her thoughts steady and her mind focused. One slow afternoon, as she wiped a table near the windows, her coworker, a woman a few years older who liked to talk just to fill the air, walked over with a smile. You okay today? You seem quiet. She gave a soft laugh. I'm always quiet. More than usual, her coworker said, leaning on the table. That piano is staring at you again, huh? She glanced at the instrument, then looked away. It's just a piano. Hung, and I'm a world-class athlete. Come on, I've heard you humming. You've got music in you. Why don't you ever play? She shrugged, because it's not my place. And I don't want to get in trouble. Her coworker rolled her eyes. You won't. The manager won't care if you play after hours. You're the only one here who could even make that thing sound alive. She smiled, but only a little. Maybe one day. You always say that, her coworker replied before getting called away by another table. The truth was, she didn't play because she was scared that, after so many years, her fingers wouldn't remember, that she would sit down and nothing would come out. She didn't want to face the idea that something she once loved so deeply might not love her back anymore. But she carried the memories with her. The late nights practicing scales until her arms ached. The afternoons spent playing songs for neighbors during small gatherings. The encouragement of an old teacher who once told her she had something rare, something real. She kept all of that inside, hidden behind the quiet steps and polite smiles. As the day went on, the restaurant prepared for something special. A large party had booked the private section, an important event that required extra care. The manager walked around, smoothing his tie and reminding everyone to stay sharp. "We've got someone very wealthy coming," he whispered to the staff, as if he were delivering a secret. "A billionaire, actually. Very well known, very demanding. Make sure everything is perfect." The waitress nodded like the rest, though she wasn't the type to be impressed by big titles. Rich or not, people were still people. But she did understand the pressure. Rich customers meant high expectations. High expectations meant more work. When the party arrived that evening, the energy in the restaurant changed. Conversations dropped to low murmurs, and everyone seemed to move a bit faster. The billionaire entered with a group of people dressed in expensive clothes. He had the kind of presence that filled a room the moment he stepped into it, not because he was friendly, but because he expected everyone to notice him. He took a seat at a large round table near the piano, a spot he probably chose on purpose. People like him always wanted to be at the center. The waitress approached the table with a calm expression, though she could feel the tension in her hands. She placed water glasses in front of each guest, one by one. They barely looked at her. When she reached the billionaire, he tapped his fingers on the table and glanced at the piano. "Does anyone here even know how to use that thing?" he asked loudly, as if speaking to the whole restaurant. Some guests laughed under their breath. The waitress kept her eyes down, pretending not to hear. "It's a shame to let it sit there like decoration," he continued. "I hate wasted potential. Doesn't this place hire anyone with talent?" His words stung a little more than she expected. She felt her stomach tighten, but forced herself to remain steady. She finished placing the glasses and stepped back. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked in a soft voice. "Yes," the billionaire said, looking at her with a smirk. "Tell me, do you think you could play it?" The question hit her like a sudden wave. Her throat tightened. "Me? No, sir. I just wait tables." "Come on," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You walked past it earlier like you knew something about it. Don't tell me you've never touched a piano before." The people around him chuckled. She felt her face warm with embarrassment. "I used to play a long time ago. Not anymore." His eyebrows lifted. "Used to? Well, that's better than never." "Play something." Her heart sank. "I can't. I'm working." "Exactly," he said. "And I'm the customer, so I'm asking you to play." "Is that a problem?" She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. She simply stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, hoping someone, maybe the manager, would interrupt. Instead, the billionaire laughed. "Relax, I'm joking. Sit. Tell your manager we need more menus." She nodded quickly, grateful for the escape. She walked away, her steps uneven, her thoughts racing. She felt foolish for letting his words shake her, but they had struck a part of her she didn't expect anyone to see. She went to the back room to gather extra menus. Her coworker met her halfway and took one look at her face. "What happened?" she whispered. "Nothing," the waitress replied, forcing a small smile. "Just a long day." But it wasn't nothing. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. Not because the billionaire had mocked her, but because his words, careless as they were, had pulled her attention back to the piano in a way she hadn't felt in years. She walked out again, this time glancing at the instrument. The room buzzed with conversation, clinking glasses, and loud laughter, but all she heard for a moment was silence. The piano sat there, untouched, waiting. The night was still long, the guests were loud, and the billionaire was already becoming the center of attention. But none of those things mattered as much as the quiet thought rising in her chest that it wasn't just a piano. It was a part of her past she wasn't sure she was ready to face, but something told her that soon, whether she liked it or not, she would have to. The night grew louder as the hours passed. The billionaire's guests talked over each other, laughed too loudly, and ordered dish after dish as if the restaurant were their private playground. The staff moved quickly around them, trying to keep up with their demands, but no matter how fast they worked, it was never enough. The waitress kept her head down and stayed focused on her tasks. She took plates to the kitchen, brought out fresh drinks, and wiped spills before customers even noticed them. But every time she passed the piano, she felt a tiny pull in her chest, the same uneasy tug she had felt earlier. It wasn't a pleasant feeling. It wasn't painful either. It was something in between, a reminder of a world she had stepped away from, a world she had once loved. She tried to shake it off. There was too much work to do, and thinking about the piano would only slow her down. But the memory of the billionaire's words lingered in her ears. Even when she didn't want to think about them, play something. He had said it like a joke, like a command he didn't expect to be taken seriously. But deep down, it had awakened something she didn't want to face. Not yet. She took a tray from the counter and made her way back toward the private section where the billionaire's group sat. The table was loud with conversation, and half of them were already waving their hands at her before she reached them. "Miss, we need more water. Can I get a different knife? This dressing tastes weird. Bring another one." All the requests came at once, but she didn't flinch. She had learned how to listen to more than one voice at a time. She nodded politely and responded with the same calm tone she used with every customer. "I'll take care of it." But before she could collect the dishes, the billionaire snapped his fingers. Not gently, not politely. It was the kind of snap meant to call a person, not to get their attention. She turned toward him slowly. "You," he said with a smirk. "Come here." She approached with steady steps. "Yes, sir?" He leaned back in his chair and looked her up and down, not in a cruel way, but in a way that told her he thought he already knew everything about her. "You moved very quickly earlier," he said. "I like that. Good workers move fast." "Thank you," she answered, though she didn't feel grateful. "But tell me something," he continued. "Why does someone who used to play piano end up waiting tables?" Her heart dropped a little. She wasn't expecting him to remember that part of their earlier conversation. She kept her voice steady. "Life changes. Responsibilities change." He raised his eyebrows. "Responsibilities? You look too young to talk like that." She gave a small smile, but didn't argue. His friends at the table leaned in, clearly interested. One of them added, "Maybe she just wasn't good enough." Another laughed. "Or maybe she's shy." She didn't react. She stood quietly and waited until the billionaire dismissed her with a wave of his hand. She returned to the kitchen, feeling a tightness in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was more like a quiet ache, something old rubbing against something new. Her coworker noticed immediately. "Hey, what did he say to you now?" "Nothing important," she replied. Her coworker frowned. "Don't let him get under your skin. People like him, they think money gives them a right to say anything." "I'm fine," the waitress insisted, though she knew she wasn't. She finished filling the water glasses and returned to the table. The billionaire was deep in conversation with a man across from him. Their voices were loud enough for her to hear even from a few steps away. "I built my whole company from nothing," the billionaire bragged. "People think talent matters. It doesn't. The only thing that matters is showing people you're above them." His friends nodded as if every word he said was wise. "Look at this place," he continued. "Nice food, fancy lights, expensive piano. But what's the point of a piano no one can play? It's like buying a sports car and leaving it in the garage. His eyes shifted toward her again. Play something, he said suddenly. I want to hear what someone with responsibilities sounds like. She froze. Sir, I really can't. You can, he interrupted. You said you used to play. So go ahead. Show us. The table grew quiet. Guests nearby turned their heads, some pretending not to listen, others openly curious. She swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to embarrass herself. She didn't want to be a form of entertainment for wealthy strangers who saw her as nothing more than a servant. But before she could answer, the manager approached with a nervous smile. Is everything all right here? He asked. The billionaire nodded. I'm asking your waitress to play the piano. I assume that's allowed? Or is the instrument just a decoration? The manager hesitated. He looked at the waitress, and at the billionaire, and back again. He knew the billionaire was important. He knew the restaurant's reputation mattered. Well, if she wants to, I suppose it's fine, he said gently. His words made her chest tighten even more. He wasn't forcing her, but the pressure was clear. The billionaire smirked. See? No problem. Go on, then. Let's hear something. The guests watched with anticipation. Some had amused smiles. Some were already pulling out their phones. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed to speak. I haven't played in a long time. I might not be good anymore. That makes it even more interesting. One of the guests said with a laugh. Another added, Come on, don't be dramatic. It's just a few notes. She stood still for a moment. The whole room felt larger, louder, and heavier. It was as if she had been pushed to the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or step back. Finally, she whispered, Just one moment. She walked to the side of the room, put down her tray, and took a slow breath. She felt her heart pounding so hard, she could hear it. Her coworker rushed to her side. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I know, the waitress said softly. But maybe I should. Why? Because I don't want them to think I'm scared of something that used to be a part of me. Her coworker squeezed her arm gently. Then play for yourself, not for them. Those words helped more than anything. She turned toward the piano. The walk felt longer than it really was. The restaurant fell into a strange hush, as if the sound of her footsteps was the only noise left. She reached the instrument and brushed, her fingers lightly over the polished wood. It felt smooth, familiar, and strangely comforting. Slowly, she lifted the cover, revealing the keys bright, clean, untouched. She sat down, her legs trembling slightly. Her hands hovered over the keys. It had been years since she last played, but the posture felt natural, like slipping into an old memory. The billionaire's voice came from behind her. Any day now. She ignored him. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to remember the feeling of music flowing through her. Not the pressure, not the expectation, just the music. Her fingers touched the keys. The first sound she played was soft, almost fragile. The note felt shaky, unsure, like a long-lost friend knocking gently at her memory. But even that one note sent a quiet wave through the room. She took a breath. Her fingers moved again, another note, then another. A small melody began to form, thin and hesitant, but real. Some guests leaned forward. Some lowered their phones. The billionaire raised an eyebrow, surprised that she hadn't failed instantly. But she wasn't thinking about him. She wasn't thinking about any of them. For the first time in years, all she thought about was the piano, the weight of the keys, the sound they made, the faint echo drifting through the room. She played slowly, unsure, testing the limits of her forgotten skill. Then something shifted. A memory clear and warm rose inside her. Her younger self practicing late at night, the glow of a small lamp. The soft voice of her old teacher telling her to feel the music, not fear it. Her breath steadied. Her hands moved a little more confidently. The melody strengthened. The room quieted. She didn't notice the billionaire's expression change. She didn't notice his friends stop laughing. She didn't notice the other diners turning in their seats. All she felt was the familiar emotion. She thought she had lost the feeling of being connected to something beautiful, something she didn't have to explain, but she also knew she was only warming up. These were just the gentle notes, the beginning of something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Still, for the first time in a long while, she didn't stop herself. She kept playing, letting the notes pull her deeper into a memory she had almost forgotten how to hold. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the moment that would change everything. The melody she played slowly faded into the air, like a soft whisper drifting away. She lifted her hands from the keys, unsure if she should stop or continue. She wasn't confident enough to play more complicated notes, yet she also wasn't ready to walk away. For a moment, her fingers rested on her lap, and she stared quietly at the piano, taking in the feeling of touching something she had loved once. Behind her, the room remained strangely quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed disappointment. It was a different kind, the kind that settles when people aren't sure how to react. A few guests blinked slowly, as if they were seeing her differently than before. Some leaned in, waiting to hear if she would continue. But the billionaire broke the silence with a light laugh. "Well," he said, "it's not bad for someone who hasn't played in years." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't looking for praise, but the way he said it felt like he was judging her instead of listening. His tone wasn't cruel. It was simply careless. The way a person speaks when they believe they already understand everything. She looked down at her hands again, trying not to let the sting show. She wasn't playing for him. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She had only wanted to remember what it felt like to create sound, to let her heart move through her hands again. The billionaire tapped the table with a bold rhythm, calling attention back to himself. "But that was too short," he said. "Play something real, something with life in it." She took in a quiet breath. "I only remember a few things," she replied gently. "Then play one of those," he insisted. "We're all waiting." She felt her shoulders tense again. It wasn't that she didn't want to play it. It was the pressure of being told to do it, the feeling of eyes watching her, like she was part of a show. She hated that part. She hated the way the billionaire's guests leaned forward with curious grins, expecting entertainment. Her coworker, standing near the edge of the room, gave her a small nod of encouragement. Not a push, not pressure, just a quiet, supportive gesture that reminded her she wasn't alone. So she took another breath, sat up straighter, and let her fingers rest gently on the keys again. Her mind searched through old songs, ones she practiced as a child, ones she used to play for neighbors when she still believed music could change her life. Finally, she chose one. It wasn't a famous piece. It wasn't complicated. It was a soft tune she had written when she was younger, back when music felt like home. She had never played it for strangers before, only for herself. Her fingers pressed the first few notes. They came out soft but steady, a little shaky but full of emotion. The melody grew slowly, unfolding like a memory. Each note carried a little piece of her past, her childhood afternoons, her hope, her quiet dreams. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the room in a way that made people stop talking. One of the billionaire's guests lowered his phone. Another tilted her head and listened more carefully. No one expected this kind of melody, not from someone they barely noticed when she was serving their table. Even the billionaire, who had been leaning back with a smug expression, straightened his posture slightly. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. He simply watched. The waitress didn't notice any of it. She was lost in the flow of the music. Her hands moved slowly at first, then a bit faster, like they were remembering something she thought she had forgotten. The melody grew stronger, warmer. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed, and for a few moments, she wasn't in the restaurant at all. She was somewhere else, her childhood home, the small living room where she had learned to play. She could almost hear the voice of the mentor who once taught her, music isn't about perfection. It's about telling the truth. Those words had stayed with her more than she realized. And now, as she played, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply telling the truth through sound. When the final note drifted into silence, she let her hands fall gently to her sides. She didn't turn around. She didn't know if anyone had even liked it. She didn't care. For the first time in a long time, playing had felt right. The room remained quiet. Then slowly, a few people began to clap. Not loudly, just soft, respectful applause. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was sincere. She blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected applause. She hadn't expected anything at all. She turned slightly and saw a few faces smiling softly at her. Not mockingly, not arrogantly, just gently. But the billionaire didn't clap. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. He studied her as though she were a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in curiosity. After a moment, he spoke. That was better. She nodded politely and stood from the piano bench. She didn't want attention. She didn't want praise. She just wanted to go back to her work and breathe in peace. But before she could take a step, the billionaire raised his voice. Play another one. She froze. Sir, I need to go back to serving. The kitchen. You can do that later, he interrupted. I'm asking you to play another. His tone was firm, almost commanding. His friends watched the exchange with excitement, as if something entertaining were about to happen. The waitress felt a familiar discomfort rise in her chest. She didn't want to disappoint him, but she also didn't want to be pushed into performing like she was not a person with a job, a duty, and a sense of dignity. She looked toward her manager, silently asking for help. But the manager only gave her a helpless look, the kind that said he didn't know how to refuse someone wealthy, enough to cause trouble for the restaurant. The billionaire rose from his chair and walked toward the piano. His steps were slow, confident, the steps of a man who believed the room belonged to him. He stopped beside her and placed a hand on the piano's edge. You have something, he said in a low voice. Something rare. Don't waste it. She didn't know how to respond. The compliment felt strange coming from him. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't arrogant. It sounded almost honest. But there was something unsettling beneath it, something she couldn't quite read. He stepped back and gestured to the bench. Sit. Play something with strength this time. She shook her head lightly. I don't know if... Don't think, he said. Just play. She took a deep breath. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing. She wasn't sure if she should walk away or stay. But the eyes around her made the choice harder. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. So she sat again. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Her heart beat loudly in her ears. The billionaire watched closely, like he was measuring every move she made. This time, she chose a different kind of melody. One that wasn't soft or gentle. One that wasn't a childhood dream. She chose something with deeper emotion, pain, strength, and resilience woven together. A piece she used to play during difficult times, when life felt too heavy, but music still helped her breathe. She pressed the first key. The sound was stronger, richer. Not loud, but full. Her hands moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The melody rose and fell, carrying a quiet power that filled the room. The guests leaned forward again. Some gasped softly at how different this song felt from the last one. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't sweet. It was honest, fierce in its own quiet way. The billionaire watched with narrowed eyes, focused so intensely it was almost uncomfortable. But he didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He simply listened. When she finished, the silence that followed was even deeper than before. It was the kind of silence that only comes after something meaningful. The billionaire finally spoke. "Now that," he said slowly, "was real." She stood again, her hands trembling slightly. "May I go back to work now?" she asked softly. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "For now." She didn't like the way he said it. She didn't like the tone behind the words. It sounded like a promise one she didn't fully understand. She walked away, her steps unsteady, her heart racing. The room slowly returned to its normal noise, but something had shifted. People noticed her now. They didn't look at her as just a waitress anymore, and the billionaire. He wasn't done with her. Not even close. The room was still buzzing from what had just happened, but she didn't hear most of it. Her hands were still slightly shaking from the pressure of sitting there at the piano, yet something in her chest felt warm, almost alive again. She had not felt that in years. She tried to stand up from the piano bench quietly, hoping she could slip back to her work before anyone noticed. But the billionaire did notice. He had been watching her closely, and not with the same amused look he carried earlier. Now he looked puzzled, annoyed, and curious all at once. She stepped away from the piano slowly, trying to get back to the safe space of the serving area. Her mind was racing with what she had just done. She wasn't proud of her performance, because she knew it wasn't her best. She was simply relieved she didn't embarrass herself. She just wanted to go back to clearing tables. She didn't want more attention. She didn't want more pressure. But the billionaire wasn't done. From his seat, he called out loudly, "Hold on. Come back here for a moment." She froze. She didn't want to return, and she didn't want to deal with him again. But she also knew refusing would only make things worse. With a quiet breath, she turned around and walked back toward the group. The guests were watching her again, but not the way they did before. Some looked curious, others looked amused, and a few looked surprised in a good way. But the billionaire's stare was the one she felt the most. "So that's all you can do?" he said, raising a brow. She blinked slowly. "Sir, I played because you asked. I did my best." He leaned back in his chair and let out a loud sigh. "Your best?" That was barely warming up. If you're going to sit at a piano in front of people, you have to actually play, not just tap a few keys and hope we clap out of pity. She felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to argue. She also didn't want to be humiliated again. She didn't even know why he was pushing her so much. "I'm sorry if it wasn't enough," she whispered. One of the guests, a woman sitting near the center, spoke up. "Hey, come on." She did fine. She didn't sign up to perform. You pulled her into this. The billionaire waved his hand dismissively. "Fine is nothing. Anyone can be fine. I want to see what she's hiding. People don't tremble like that unless they're holding back something big." She frowned. "I wasn't hiding anything." "Yes, you were," he said firmly. "You were scared. And fear only comes from pressure. And pressure comes from skill. Nobody fears the piano unless they know what it can do to them." She didn't like how accurately he was reading her. She didn't want to admit he was right. She didn't want to admit that playing again, really playing, terrified her. But she didn't know what else to say. "I need to get back to work," she finally said. The billionaire leaned forward. "You will. But first, play again. She felt her throat tighten. "Please." "I don't want to. And I don't care what you want," he answered, not unkindly, but firmly. "You're scared. Which means there's something inside you worth seeing. So play again." Her manager stepped forward quietly and whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to. I'll step in." But the room had already shifted. People were waiting. People were watching. She didn't want to look weak, and she didn't want to give the billionaire one more reason to mock her. She turned her gaze toward the piano again. It felt like a stranger now, something she once loved but had pushed away for so long. She didn't want to sit back down, but she also didn't want to run away. One slow breath later, she walked back toward the piano bench. When she sat this time, her hands didn't shake as much. Not because she felt confident, but because she felt tired of being afraid. The room grew quieter, waiting for her to start. She placed her fingers on the keys again. Her palms were a little sweaty, and her breath was uneven, but she forced herself to stay still. "What should I play?" she asked softly. The billionaire shrugged. "Whatever you play when nobody's watching." Her eyes lowered for a moment. She knew exactly what that meant. She hadn't played like that in years. She wasn't sure she could. "I'll try," she whispered. This time, she didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the billionaire. She didn't look at her coworkers. She closed her eyes, and the memories came back. She remembered the small room she used to practice in, the one with peeling wallpaper and a window that always let in too much sunlight. She remembered her old keyboard, missing a few keys, but still perfect to her. She remembered sitting there for hours, playing whatever came to her heart. She took another breath and let her fingers move. The first notes were soft, almost fragile. It was a melody she once wrote, something she never showed anyone. It started slow, almost like a whisper, and for a moment she feared the guests would get bored, but the sound grew fuller, richer. As she let herself sink into the music, this wasn't the cautious playing from earlier. This wasn't her trying to get through a song to please the room. This was something she felt, something she carried deep inside her. She forgot about the billionaire's gaze. She forgot about the phones in people's hands. She forgot about the pressure dot, and soon the room forgot to breathe. The melody climbed gently, rising and falling like waves. Her fingers danced across the keys with a softness she had nearly forgotten she had. She wasn't performing, she was remembering. She was healing. She was speaking without saying a word. For a moment, she opened her eyes. The entire room was still. Not one person moved. Not one fork scraped a plate. Not one whisper passed between the guests. Everyone sat frozen, as if afraid to interrupt the fragile beauty filling the air. She let her eyes close again and continued playing. The music shifted into something deeper, something heavier, but still gentle. It carried memories of the struggles she'd lived through. The nights she stayed awake, worrying about her family. The early mornings when she had no choice but to leave her dreams behind so she could work. She poured all of it into the piano dot. The billionaire, who had looked bored earlier, now leaned forward with both elbows on the table, listening more closely than anyone. His expression softened, not in pity, but in recognition. Like he understood, maybe for the first time, that the girl he mocked was carrying something he had never expected. By the time she reached the final notes, her chest felt tight. Her fingers slowed, gently releasing the last notes into the silent room. They drifted into the air and softened until they disappeared completely. She didn't move for a moment. Nobody moved. She opened her eyes again. The room was still frozen. She stood up slowly from the bench. Her legs felt weak, and her breath was shaky again. She didn't know what she had just done. She didn't know what the room would think. She only knew the silence felt more real than any applause could. Then the billionaire stood up. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at her, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. Finally, he said, softly but clearly, "That was real." She didn't know how to respond. She didn't even know if that was a compliment. But he nodded slowly. "You should never hide that again," he added. She lowered her eyes. Unsure of what to say, the guests started murmuring, some whispering to each other about how unexpected it was. A few even looked emotional. The woman from earlier wiped at the corner of her eye. Trying to look casual, her manager stood near the doorway, smiling quietly. Proud in a way he didn't need to say out loud, she looked around the room, overwhelmed. She didn't know what this moment meant. She didn't know what would happen next. But she did know one thing. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she didn't want to hide anymore either. The room was still filled with silence, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that comes after something meaningful. She could feel every pair of eyes on her as she slowly stepped away from the piano. Her heart was beating fast, but not with fear this time. It was something different, something she couldn't name yet. Her hands were warm, her breathing unsteady, and she felt like she had left a piece of herself on those keys. But reality soon returned. She was still a waitress. She still had tables to clear, food to serve, and a shift to finish. She gently smoothed her apron and tried to walk back toward the serving area, hoping the night could move on quietly. She didn't get far. A man stood up from one of the tables and stepped in her path. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He simply held out his hand as if trying to stop her without scaring her. "That was something else," he said softly. She didn't know how to respond, so she offered a polite smile and lowered her gaze. "Thank you, but I really need to get back to work." "You will," he said calmly. "But I just wanted to tell you, your music felt real, not like something practiced or forced. It felt like life." His words were gentle, but they made her cheeks warm. She nodded again and slipped past him, reminding herself she still had a job to do. As she returned to the counter, her coworker was waiting with wide eyes. "I didn't know you could play like that," they whispered. She shook her head. "I didn't plan any of this." "No one plans something like that," her coworker said with a soft laugh. "It just happens, because it's meant to." She didn't know if she agreed, but she appreciated the comfort. She grabbed a tray and walked toward a table to clear it. But before she got there, another guest stopped her. "You should be performing somewhere," the woman said, "not carrying plates around." "I'm just doing my job," she replied gently. "That's not your job," the woman insisted. "Your job is music. You can see it. You can feel it." Her heart tightened again. She didn't know how to explain her past to strangers. They didn't know the reasons she walked away from music, the reasons she let go of that dream. But before she could respond, the billionaire spoke from behind her. "She played well," he said, "but she hasn't shown everything yet." She froze. The tone in his voice wasn't mocking this time. It wasn't demanding or arrogant. It was something else, a strange mix of curiosity and something that almost sounded like respect. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket as he walked toward her. The guests around him watched closely, unsure of what he would say. "You hid something," he said quietly as he reached her. "I could hear it." She met his eyes for a brief moment. "I didn't hide anything." "Yes, you did," he replied. "And I can tell you're not done." That song wasn't the end of it. She took a step back, feeling overwhelmed. "Please, sir. I really just want to get back to my work." The billionaire nodded slowly, surprising her. "All right. But remember, this rooms don't go silent for just anyone." He returned to his seat, leaving her slightly confused, slightly shaken. and slightly curious about what he meant. The rest of the night continued, but it felt different. People weren't just customers anymore. They were watching her with a new kind of attention. Some smiled warmly at her. Some looked like they wanted to approach her, but didn't want to interrupt her work. Even her manager checked on her more than usual, making sure she was all right. At one point, she slipped into the hallway near the kitchen to catch her breath. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The echo of her song still floated in her mind. Her hands still felt the keys. Her heart still felt heavy and light at the same time. She whispered to herself, "Why did I play that?" She didn't know. She hadn't meant to. She didn't plan on pouring her heart out in front of strangers. But something inside her opened up the moment she closed her eyes. And once the music began, she couldn't stop it. As she stood there trying to process everything, her manager approached. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded slowly. "I think so. You did something special out there," he said. "Don't brush it off." She looked down. "I wasn't trying to be special." He smiled kindly. "Sometimes the best things happen when we're not trying at all." Her shift eventually ended. But even as she changed out of her apron and tied her hair back, she still felt the weight of the night on her shoulders. She walked out into the cool air, hoping the quiet would help settle her thoughts. But the billionaire was waiting near the entrance. She stopped. She didn't expect him to still be there. All the guests had left, and he was standing alone with his hands in his pockets, staring at the street. When he noticed her, he turned. "You heading home?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. "I wanted to talk to you before you left." She didn't know what he wanted now. She stayed quiet, waiting. "You know," he began, "I meet musicians all the time. People who train for years. People who perform on the biggest stages. But very few make a room disappear the way you did." She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." "That wasn't a scene," he said calmly. "That was truth." She didn't know what to say. "You've got something rare," he continued. "Something you shouldn't waste." She shifted her weight uncomfortably. "I'm not trying to waste anything. I'm just living my life." "And what kind of life is that?" he asked gently, though his tone still held that firmness he always carried. "Serving food until your feet hurt? Going home exhausted? Hiding from something you were born to do?" Her eyes lowered. She felt exposed, like he could see more than she wanted him to. He didn't push further. "I'm not saying you have to perform. I'm not saying you have to chase anything. But don't bury it. Don't silence yourself." She finally looked up at him, unsure whether to feel offended or grateful. He offered her a small card. "If you ever want help training, connections, anything, call this number. No pressure. No expectations." She hesitated, then took the card. It felt heavy, even though it was just paper. "Good night," he said, tipping his head slightly. She nodded. "Good night." He walked away, leaving her standing under the soft glow of the STREETLIGHT. She looked down at the card again. Her fingers tightened around it. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she would call the number. She didn't know if she wanted to open the door to music again. But she did know one thing. Something inside her had shifted tonight. She walked home slowly, feeling the cool night air on her face. She listened to the quiet around her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. She didn't know where it would lead. She didn't know if she could face the fear again. She didn't know if she could trust herself enough to return to music. But something in her chest whispered softly, almost like a melody, "Don't hide." She held on to that thought as she reached her front door. She paused, looked up at the sky, and took a deep breath. Her life had changed tonight, even if only a little, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she wasn't running anymore either. The morning felt different from every other morning she had lived through in the last few years. She woke slowly, blinking at the soft light coming in through the thin curtains. Her room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made her mind drift back to the night before the piano. The silence, the billionaire's voice, the people staring like they were witnessing something rare got. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her head. She still couldn't believe she had played like that in front of a room full of strangers. She couldn't believe anyone had listened. She couldn't believe the silence that came afterward, heavy and full of meaning. And she really couldn't believe the billionaire's offer. The small card he gave her lay on her bedside table. She turned her head toward it. Even from across the room, it felt like it carried weight. She didn't know if she would use it. She didn't even know if she wanted to. But she couldn't deny how it made her feel. She sat up slowly, letting the cool air brush across her shoulders. Her hands still tingled a little, as if her fingers were remembering the keys on their own. It had been years since she let herself play that deeply, and yet it felt like something inside her had been waiting for that moment. She stretched, got up, and moved toward the small kitchen. Her apartment was tiny, but she kept it clean and warm. She made tea, standing quietly as the water heated. She wrapped her hands around the cup and sat down at the table. The card was still there, Dot. She stared at it. It stared back. Finally, she whispered to herself, "What am I supposed to do now?" The truth was she didn't know. She had spent the last few years trying to be ordinary, trying to stay away from anything that reminded her of her old life, trying to forget the dreams she once had. She had learned to live quietly. She had learned to hide, but after last night, hiding didn't feel the same. Her heart felt restless, as if something had been shaken awake. She sighed and pushed the card away, telling herself she needed to get ready for another long shift. Life didn't stop just because she played one song Dot at the restaurant. People acted differently around her. Some smiled more warmly. Some whispered when she passed by. Her coworkers greeted her with a kind of gentle admiration. "You okay today?" One asked softly. She nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking a lot." "You were amazing," they said. "I hope you know that." She thanked them and tried to stay focused on her work, but her mind drifted all day. Customers who were there the night before tried to talk to her. "You have a gift," an older man told her. "Don't throw it away." "You made me cry," a woman confessed. "In a good way." "You should record something," another person suggested. Each comment pressed a little more on the part of her heart she spent years trying to protect. She smiled at them politely, but inside she felt overwhelmed. She wasn't ready for attention. She wasn't ready for expectations. She wasn't ready to step into something she had once walked away from, yet she couldn't deny something had changed. Later in the evening, her manager approached. "You all right? You've been quiet all day." She nodded. "I'm okay. Just thinking." He gave her a kind smile. "If you ever need time off to figure things out, just tell me." She looked at him with surprise. "Why would I need time off?" He smiled softly. "Because sometimes life nudges us toward something bigger, and we need space to recognize it." She didn't know what to say. She only nodded Dot when her shift was finally over. She walked outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark, dotted with faint stars. The street was quiet. She pulled the card from her pocket and stared at it again. She turned it over between her fingers. She didn't call. She didn't text. She simply held it. She didn't know why she was scared. Maybe it was because music wasn't just a hobby to her. It wasn't something casual. It was connected to memories, some beautiful, some painful. It was a world she had once lived in, a world she left behind for reasons she didn't like remembering. She took a deep breath and put the card back in her pocket. Before she could take a step, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned. The billionaire stood a few feet away. Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected to see him again. He wasn't dressed like he had been at the event. His outfit was simpler, now still expensive, but not as formal. He looked at her with a calm expression. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, very long." He stepped closer, but not too close. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you last night." "You didn't," she said quietly. I wasn't expecting any of this." He nodded. "I know, but I meant what I said. You have something rare." She looked down. "Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true." She didn't know how to respond. He glanced around as if choosing his words carefully. "I didn't come here to pressure you. I just wanted to ask one thing." She looked up. "Why did you stop playing?" he asked gently. Her breath caught. She wasn't ready for that question. She had avoided it for years, pushing the memories deep inside. But now someone stood in front of her, asking not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. She swallowed hard. "Life happened," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "It usually does." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "You don't have to explain anything. You don't owe me that. But don't shut the door on something you love just because life got in the way." She felt a sting behind her eyes, the kind that comes before tears. She blinked them away. "I'm not asking you to become famous," he continued. "I'm not asking you to perform for crowds or chase anything you don't want. But I am asking you to choose yourself. That's all." His words landed softly, but they reached deep. She breathed slowly. "I don't know if I can start again." "You don't have to start," he said. "You just have to keep going." She didn't know how to answer that. She only stared at him, unsure of what she was feeling. He offered a small smile. "If you ever want help, you know how to reach me. But whatever you do, don't silence that part of you again." He stepped back, nodded once, and began walking away. She watched him go. She felt something shift inside her, something gentle and firm at the same time. She took out the card again and stared at it under the streetlight. Her fingers tightened around it. "After a long moment," she whispered, "maybe it's time." The next morning, she sat at her small table with her old keyboard in front of her. It was dusty, missing a few keys, and barely worked anymore. But it was hers. She plugged it in. The hum of power filled the room. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first sound was soft, uneven. But it didn't matter. She closed her eyes and played. The melody that came out was the same one she played at the restaurant, but softer, more fragile, like she was relearning how to speak. She played for minutes. Then for an hour. Then longer. When she finally stopped, tears were running down her cheeks. But they weren't sad tears. She wiped them gently. Then she picked up the billionaire's card. Her hands shook, but only a little. She dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. On the third ring, he answered. "Hello?" She took a breath. "It's me," she said softly. I think I'm ready to talk." There was a pause. Then a warm, calm voice responded, "Good, let's begin." And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't walking alone anymore. Her story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning.